Therapy Chat Podcast, episode 138.
This is the Therapy Chat Podcast with Laura Reagan, LCSW-C. The information shared in this podcast is not a substitute for seeking help from a licensed mental health professional. And now, here's your host, Laura Reagan, LCSW-C.
Hi, welcome back to Therapy Chat. I'm your host, Laura Reagan, and today I am talking with two very interesting people, Rebecca Williams and Julie Kraft, who are the authors of the new book, The Gift of Recovery, 52 Mindful Ways to Live Joyfully Beyond Addiction. We had a really interesting discussion talking about how loss is a factor in addiction, which was a new perspective that I haven't heard before expressed in just this way, and I really appreciated what they had to say about this. Before we jump into our episode, I want to say thank you so much to all of you who have already supported the Patreon page. In case you missed it, I have partnered with Patreon to allow you listeners to make a contribution to keep Therapy Chat going. And if everyone who subscribes to Therapy Chat were to donate just $1 per month, Therapy Chat could keep going and growing even more than it already is. And in case you missed it also, Therapy Chat just celebrated 1 million downloads last week. Thank you all so much for your support. We could not do it without you. So let's go ahead and listen to my interview with Rebecca Williams, PhD, and Julie Kraft, LMFT. Hi, welcome back to Therapy Chat. Today, I'm very excited to be talking with two fascinating people who are the authors of two books that you are going to hear all about. Today, I'm talking with Rebecca Williams, PhD, and Julie Kraft, LMFT. Rebecca and Julie, thanks so much for being on Therapy Chat today.
Thanks for having us, Laura. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. I'm very excited that you're here. So you are the authors of two books together. Your new book is The Gift of Recovery, 52 Mindful Ways to Live Joyfully Beyond Addiction. And then your previous book is The Mindfulness Workbook for Addiction, a guide to coping with the grief, stress, and anger that trigger addictive behaviors.
That's right. You've got them both.
So let's just start off with, if you would, both of you telling our audience a bit about yourselves and what you do.
Sure, I'll tackle that one first. I'm Julie Kraft. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist here in California. So primarily I'm looking at the relational side of things. It's kind of what I try to bring to the table in our books, thinking about how addiction relates to relationships and how relationships affect addictive behaviors. So I have a private practice here in San Diego and also teach a course over at the University of San Diego called Systemic Treatment of Substance Abuse. So we look at the family system a lot. And I've been working with Rebecca closely for quite some time, too many years to talk about probably. Even before I was a licensed therapist, she was a mentor to me for a long time, starting over at the University of San Diego in my graduate program, and then we worked together at the VA here in San Diego as well.
Yeah, and Julie and I met at the VA. I've been a licensed psychologist for 20 years. I'm here in San Diego. Actually, I spent the whole time at the VA San Diego. And also I've had different types of jobs like private practice and teaching at the University of San Diego, primarily as a licensed psychologist. And I run a clinic at the VA here, helping veterans return to employment, veterans who have medical conditions, mental health conditions, trauma, substance abuse recovery. We're trying to get folks back on their feet and back out into the working world.
Awesome. So how did you two decide to write your first book together? How did that come about from their relationship?
Yeah, that's just when you asked that, I had a very clear picture of the moment that Rebecca mentioned it to me. It was something that Rebecca had been envisioning, I think, for some time, and was my supervisor over at the VA, and she and I were working closely together in our clinical work. And she knew I had a strong interest in substance use and abuse. So she had been cooking up this idea of the connection between loss and addiction, and really the power of loss in someone's life, and how much that was really a factor in addiction. And she had felt at the time that, I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot for you, but I remember this so much, that, she really felt like there was a gap in the literature in regards to loss when she was doing her own literature search in terms of substance abuse. So she just asked me if I might be interested, and I really was. So that's how we got started.
Yeah, exactly. I saw a spark in Julie pretty much from the beginning. She's a phenomenal clinician and just an all-around awesome person. So I wanted to, when you work with someone, when you co-write books or you just co-anything together, you got to like the person a lot. It helps because it's a long journey. And I remember saying to Julie, I have this idea about trying to figure out what loss has to do with recovery from addiction and why my clients continually to do the same behaviors over and over again. And I believe loss is involved in that. And I said, you don't have to say yes now. Think about it, because it's a 5-year commitment to write a book from beginning to end. And it does take a relationship that's going to sustain 5 years at least. So she thought about it and she was excited, and then it went really from there pretty quickly. We kind of got a good vibe going, and we started writing the contract for the book for New Harbinger, and they accepted it fairly quickly. And then we were on the way to make it happen.
That's awesome. 5 years to write a book? Gosh.
Well, when I say a 5-year relationship, it takes about door to door about 18 months to write a self-help book. I don't know what other books are like, but this book and both of our books, it's about 18 months from door to door. However, after that, there's things like your show, Laura, the podcast and other marketing to keep the book in the front of people for another couple of years at least, if not longer.
Forever, you hope. Yeah.
Forever. Yeah. But even that, just keeping it going, it's like a little train that you have to keep working at it. And so Julie and I probably email back and forth 3 or 4 times a day, especially in the marketing phase. And also in the work phase, she would write a chapter, send it to me. I would edit it, relax, and then I would send it back to her and vice versa. That went on for a year. So it's quite a process.
Wow.
It is. I've been tracking it for myself timeline-wise, because we started discussing this book, The Gift of Recovery, and whether we were ready to tackle a second book when my younger son was just about 2 months old. And he's turning 2 next week. So, and the book just came out. So it was that, basically his lifetime so far. We've been working on it. Yeah.
Wow. That makes sense. But thanks for sharing, how long it really takes and what it's really like, because people are always like, maybe I'll write a book. And, I think about that too. It's like, if I were to write a book, how would I even be able to do it? And then, just having a realistic example of how long it takes is helpful.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of co-authorship and co-writing and just working with bouncing ideas off of someone else. I know people like to work in a vacuum by themselves and just, I'm going to do this. Our experience has been phenomenal. Just being able to bounce ideas off. Some things work, some things don't work, of course. And to have the kindness of someone else reading your work before you send it out to the publisher is much more kind than actually throwing your stuff out there and you're going like, oh, I hope they like it. And there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen once it gets to the publisher. A lot of people editing, rereading, changing titles, changing covers. I mean, it's a machine. And but to have someone to support in that process to me, has been a phenomenal experience. I wouldn't do it any other way.
Yeah, I agree.
That's cool. That's really nice. Well, so I want to ask you about something you were saying about when Rebecca first mentioned the idea of doing this book, the issue of loss. Can you tell our audience what you're really talking about when you say loss and then how that relates to addiction, what you've kind of come to with that.
Yeah, so in the Mindfulness Workbook for Addiction, our first book, we identify loss as basically any time that you've said goodbye to something, which was a bit broad, but we really wanted to do it that way because we believe there are a lot of things that people don't identify as a loss that really impacts them that way. So we have a really long, hefty list of losses in that workbook for the reader to kind of check off the list of their experiences. And then, of course, they can identify which were most impactful for them. But really, something like moving houses or graduating college, some things that, yes, are exciting and are to be embraced and enjoyed. There's also a loss component when there's change. And then, of course, as therapists, we know things like a divorce can be experienced very much like the loss of a loved one. It needs to be grieved, those kinds of experiences, much like a death. So there's a whole range, and of course, trauma, all kinds of trauma is on that list, abuse, and just, it is a significant list. But yeah, we really looked at all the different factors that we were seeing clinically that our clients were experiencing as a loss.
Yeah. And the loss was, it's like a cycle. The loss of our clients was perpetuating a further addiction. And then addiction, as you probably know, Laura, causes additional losses because you're losing relationships, you're losing jobs, you're losing money, you're losing, your health, freedom, if you're incarcerated. So for me, because I've been thinking about loss for so long, I think it really has, if I can go a little personal for a second, it had to do with my mom gave a child up for adoption many, many moons ago. And I knew in the household something wasn't right, but I didn't know what it was. So I grew up with a mom who really was struggling with that decision. And then she, of course, chose alcohol as a way to cope with her decision making and her struggles. And I was a part of that. So I always knew that there was something going on. And I think that was the germination of my experience with living with someone who had a traumatic loss and did not fully grieve it and used alcohol and cigarettes, of course, to handle her emotions. So that was my experience. And that's how this whole idea came to be.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that in your personal story. And that really makes sense. And I think about the idea that's being discussed lately about addiction, that it relates to attachment wounds, and loss is an attachment wound, right? Especially if it happens in childhood.
Exactly, Laura. That's perfectly well said. And that's what we're noticing in our clients continually. And the research is very scant on understanding attachment, loss, and addiction, or in general. No one wants to touch this topic. It's kind of talking about loss is kind of tricky, and people tend to shy away from it. So
yeah, that seems to be the case with pretty much all the most painful things in our society. We just don't want to go there. But as we talk today, there have been 2 celebrity suicides this week, and a new report that suicide is increasing in the U.S. came out yesterday, I believe. And, it's impossible we can try to ignore the pain that people are feeling, but, it's the examples of what happens when people are in all this pain that they feel like they can't escape from are everywhere.
Exactly. Those 2 suicides this last week in the celebrity circles, both of those, from my understanding, had a relationship with a loss of a relationship. So one was a potential divorce, and the other one was a loss of a relationship. And that is, as we're saying, that is a huge component to be able to cope with. But there is hope out there, and there are ways to cope with loss, and that's why we wrote these books, to actually give people a lot of hope and a lot of encouragement to kind of just, as you say, tackle the rough things and realize that there's support in place, including the suicide prevention hotline number, 1-800-273-8255. I know it by heart. So, yeah.
Thank you for adding that. And I'll be sure to put that into the show notes as well. And yeah, there is hope. And I think that talking about painful things like trauma, loss, a painful childhood, addiction is a painful thing to talk about, but it's also, it doesn't help it get better by just pretending it's not there.
Yeah, I just, thinking in terms of the recent suicides and what we're talking about here, I don't know why, but social media is really coming to my mind right now, because I think so much of our world right now is very public, much like a celebrity's world is often very public, but people's pain remains very private, and people are very isolated in their pain. So when we think about attachment and addiction, attachment and depression, I really do feel like attachment is lacking. Like quality attachments in our world are really lacking. As much as we are connected, quote unquote, through social media, in other ways that feel a little bit more surface, like your best self, your happy vacations, all these things are really posted right out there for the world. But a lot of what's going on, like your substance abuse issues, for example, are kind of tucked away behind the scenes. And it feels like a greater and greater disconnect between what's really happening and what needs to be addressed and connected with and supported is somehow increasingly private and separated out from our public persona.
Yeah. I see what you're saying, and we talk often about how what you see on social media is not real, but it's still if that's all you know of the person and they're presenting a certain image, that's what you think is their reality.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And just the, social comparison is extremely normal, right? It's a way that we've adapted to survive. As you look around and see, what's everybody else doing? What are they eating? What's happening in my cohort here? And pay attention to that, and then look at yourself and compare. It's just really normal to do. But when what we're comparing ourselves to is this image of everybody else seems like they're doing great, can be a really lonely place to be.
Agreed. Yeah. So, from what you said when you first introduced yourself, you mentioned how you bring the relational piece into this. And, everything we're talking about so far is relationships, really.
Yeah. And the relationship with yourself. And I think that's what's cool about mindfulness that we added to both books joyfully, is to really kind of slow the train down a little bit and reconnect, number one, with yourself. In this fast-paced world, it's extremely difficult to do. And that's why the gift of recovery kind of gives you kind of a day-by-day, week-by-week reconnection with yourself. Once you get yourself kind of, cooled down, then you're more able to interact with your relationships, your family, your friends, work. But if everyone is working on this nerve ending, way of being, it's very difficult to interact with other people. You just kind of go in very irritable and you come out irritable. So we're trying to convey and help ourselves and other people to slow down, to breathe, to reconnect with yourself and make space for it. That's pretty much, to me, everything. Once we get that, then addiction recovery is a natural progression. Yeah,
so I agree with you so much when you said that connection with yourself is so important. And oftentimes, we are so focused on making connections with other people, but we really are disconnected from ourselves. And so then we can't have deep, meaningful relationships with other people because we don't really even know who we are.
Where this all started. And there's an opportunity, especially with your podcast. You've had a couple great other on who are talking about yoga and meditation and mindfulness. I mean, the direction you're taking is terrific. And not just for clients, but mostly for clinicians who are seeing a lot of people and trauma and distress, to be able for the counselor to slow themselves down and to reconnect with their own self and their own values. So it's a journey.
Yeah. And it's one that we constantly, that's why they call it a practice, right? You have to continually practice. So something you said in your book, in the newest book, is that meditation isn't always pleasant and it's not always comfortable. And I'm thinking about how when people stop using substances and begin to be in recovery, they're experiencing all the feelings that they were numbing before.
So true.
Yeah. And then meditation it doesn't take you away from those feelings. It may take you more into them.
Yes, that's been my experience. In fact, at the beginning of my meditation journey, I was really anxious and angry, uncomfortable, confused. All those feelings, just because it was quiet, they all kind of popped to the surface.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to continue. I was like, what's the point of this? And I just kept going back to my little cushion, first with all my accoutrements around me. I brought my newspaper and my cereal and my coffee with me up to my little yoga area, my meditation area. And eventually I slowly got rid of all of the distractions around me. And what I had left was kind of a slowly going toward some peace of mind. And it takes time. I mean, it could take quite a bit of time to actually have the feeling of a calm mind. It's not going to be automatic, but every part of the journey is an important part of the journey for meditation.
Yeah. I definitely just want to emphasize how much that's been my experience too. And I've had certain times where I've encouraged clients to listen to a guided meditation. And when we listened to it together in the session, and then I would ask the client what their experience was like afterwards, and they would say, it was terrible. These images started coming to my mind. And I just started thinking about all these things that happened to me. And I guess I was doing it wrong. And it was like, well, sounds like you were doing it right. But, but what came was all this stuff that, your brain has been trying to let you know about, that you want to push away. And, I wasn't happy that they had that distress when it came up. I wasn't glad that happened to them. But when it happened, they thought that meant, oh, I'm doing this wrong. I need to stop. And really it meant, wow, you got mindful and that's what's in there,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so much about just paying attention and greeting what arises. So that's a word that we use a lot in the gift of recovery, is kind of greeting or inviting or introducing yourself to whatever arises in the moment in that experience, including all the emotions, whether we identify them as pleasant or unpleasant, of just kind of, sitting with those and letting yourself say hello, and connect a little bit and be curious about that experience in that mindful way, rather than what a lot of people have as the instinct is, absolutely not. I just won't feel this. How do I not feel this? Which is where the addiction can certainly come in.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like we all have an inner bully, as Julie has written about in Gift of Recovery, this sort of inner part of us that is constantly judging ourselves, and not in the best of ways. So we, part of mindfulness is noticing that inner bully and just giving it some compassion, saying, I see that you're there. I hear you. It's okay. You're going to be all right. And I'm going to be all right. And just allowing the experience to just flow without the pressure of reacting to your inner bully.
Yeah. Yeah. We all have that inner bully or inner critic. And I think what meditation does for me is just gives me a little bit of space between hearing that inner voice or feeling an emotion that I don't like and saying, oh, something's wrong. I shouldn't be feeling this. Let me try to push it away. Just a little bit of space and go, oh, look what's here, So I would like to ask you if you would kind of talk about how the book is organized. I think it's really cool and how it's meant to be used, because I think it's really accessible and there, each chapter is bite-sized but packed with resources at the same time.
Yeah, thanks. That's exactly what we were going for. Yeah, I just feel like it's so important for people when they're picking up a book that is a self-help book to really be able to digest what they're reading and really be able to sit with it and learn from it and grow from it, without feeling overwhelmed by it either. So we did choose the 52 chapters intentionally, thinking of it as potentially a weekly reader over the course of a year in recovery. And of course, you can move more quickly or more slowly depending on what fits for you. But we do have this idea of kind of reading a chapter and digesting that and sitting with it over the course of a week, journaling about it and practicing it from day to day. And then, of course, at the end of every chapter, we did a daily affirmation. So there's 7 affirmations for each topic, that each day there would be something that you would kind of focus on and try to draw in and really allow yourself to grow with. So that was kind of the thinking, that, maybe in the first year or in any year really in recovery, that you'd be able to work through the book and get as much out of it as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we wanted it to be friendly from men or women or teenagers, or our other book is in prisons, in their treatment programs across the country, in jails and prisons where they're doing recovery, hopefully. And also it's in hospitals and recovery centers. And that's the goal of this book, is if you're in a recovery center, to actually give yourself the space to do a mindfulness break during your recovery time in the recovery center. So the design is intentional to make sure it can be picked up, that people like to look at it, that people like to hold it, we have some downloadable meditations, which are very fun. We've never done that before. I think there are 10 of them that people can hook into. And there's also a downloadable affirmations packet that people can gravitate to if they want to do that. So it's something for everybody.
Yeah, I love it. You have a beautiful meditation in every chapter, and some of them are downloadable so that people can listen to them. But, I think when I'm reading a book, I like to, if I wanted to do the meditation, I would want to not be looking at the book. So for me, I would like to record the meditation for myself and then be able to listen to it on my phone while I'm meditating or something, so that, I don't have to grab the book and find the page and get out of my mindful state.
That's a great idea. I never thought of having your own voice record your own meditation from the book. That's a great idea. We have a professional who's recorded 10 of the meditations.
Yeah.
But I really like the idea of having your own voice do the meditation. What a good idea.
Yeah, I've done that with clients where it's actually my voice and they record it on their phone, which I think is a nice thing to have your therapist's voice that you're so familiar with, and it's hopefully a source of comfort and support in your process. So, but yeah, something about having your own voice is also really lovely to kind of take ownership of that.
Yeah, both. I think that the therapist's voice can be really great too. And you do have the audio downloads for many of them, but I think I probably just thought of that because I'm a podcaster and I'm always recording my voice anyway. So it was like, oh, I could record these. I would like to hear these read out in my own voice and listen to them.
Very, very wonderful idea.
Yeah.
But how does this book work together with your other book, or does it?
Yeah, we think of this one as building off of the first book to a certain degree. Not that not that it doesn't stand alone, but I think having a workbook, the Mindfulness Workbook for Addiction, is a lot about putting pen to paper, a lot about completing these exercises in the workbook, really writing things out and doing the checklist and looking at some of what was going on underneath the addiction, the loss addiction cycle that Rebecca touched on, and having you really get a grasp on where the losses were, how they were influencing the addictive behaviors, and then how the addiction was actually causing more loss in your life, and really getting a handle on all of that. And then for this book, I feel as though it's really like, a companion to that. So kind of offering all right, now you've done a lot of this hard work to look at things underneath and to facilitate your initial recovery. Let's give you a companion, someone to kind of hold your hand for the next year or however long you want to engage with this book, and really keep walking the path of recovery. And just, I think of this book, The Gift of Recovery, a lot about cultivating joy cultivating peace and really developing a life in recovery from addiction that is really fulfilling. Because I often talk to clients and patients at the hospital where I used to work about getting sober, and a lot of people feel like that is bleak. That is the end of joy and the end of calm, because the substance or the addicted behavior was what was providing any sense of pleasure or peace when they were addicted. So really, this book is just kind of a celebration of what sobriety and recovery can look like, and just really happy, wonderful life that's waiting in recovery from addiction, and just, all the different things that you can continue to do to feel really joyful moving forward.
That's interesting, because I think that in my experience and from talking with people about their experiences, which I'm not a substance abuse counselor, so I don't have the experience that you two have, but I kind of got the picture that a lot of people are seeking joy and peace through their addictive behaviors, but not finding it. It's more of I'm hoping this will dull my pain. I mean, I know sometimes like maybe there's more, you might feel a little more relaxed or something when someone uses, but you can find relaxation when you're not using. That's real relaxation, I don't know. It's like, to me, the clarity is where you can tap into the joy and the peace.
Absolutely. It's, being in recovery, it's a much more authentic state of joy and authentic sense of peace. Of course, any kind of spiritual transformation, like, I believe that can only happen when you're not under the influence of a substance, really. But when I think about dopamine, what I know about the brain, a meth user, what they're going to experience in terms of a dopamine release and that high when they're using is going to be really hard to come by in early sobriety, or really ever. I mean, that's not a natural state. So while there is, of course, unbelievable pleasure and wonderful things, not only, but mostly wonderful things waiting in recovery, I really do believe that there's a better way to live. There is a great deal of loss that people experience when they give up their addicted life, because it was, something that they identified as the only bright spot was, in their life at that time was when using.
Yeah. Okay. That definitely also rings true for me. I just wasn't thinking about that. I guess like there's that intense surge of sensation that comes with some drugs, that people feel that they don't feel they would be able to have that feeling again if they are sober, and they probably won't. But the general feeling throughout their lives, as their lives settle down and they get more connected with themselves and their own emotions, you can experience more of the highs and lows of life, but be able to tolerate them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And there's, it would be great if we could all, experience the highs of, let's say cocaine with absolutely no consequence, right?
Yeah.
If there was no consequences for using substances, I think many of us would say, okay, like, great, I just get to feel really, up for a while, or I have more energy, or maybe in the case of benzos or alcohol, I'm no longer stressed. I just feel calm, right? Oh, okay, everything feels kind of easy. Like, when you've got a couple glasses of wine or something, and there was no fallout from that, it would be a different picture. Substances, there's an absolute consequence, particularly when they become problematic. The consequences are perpetual and so painful. I mean, the recovering life is obviously so much more fulfilling and fabulous than the addicted life. But, as you and I talk about that very rationally, that's a conversation that looks really different with addicted clients, because that does not feel real to them. The recovering life does not feel appealing to a lot of people. It's scary, it's new, and it's a lot to give up. They might be giving up friends and like everyone they know is at the bar, their family members maybe using with them. There's a lot to navigate there. So it's a big adjustment.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for going a little deeper on that and helping me think about that more. So one thing I'm wondering is whether these two books are useful with other addictive behaviors, or you might say self-destructive behaviors like eating disorders, or, other, in addition to substance addiction, issues that people are struggling with that sort of follow a similar path?
Yeah, we have heard back from people who use the first workbook as well. I think this will be another wonderful addition to people's clinical libraries. But for eating disorders, it's a big deal. And I'm glad you brought that up, Laura, because our book is being used in eating disorder clinics, in fact, here in San Diego. And then the other area, of course, is a gambling addiction. There's porn addiction, there's internet addiction, there's so many things. Shopping addiction, we won't go there. But no, I do think this is just life recovery. I think we have to all think of ourselves as it's stressful out there. There's going to be ups and downs. There's certain things you need to do to come back to yourself to be well. And what Julie and I believe in is the resilient mind and the resilient person. It takes kind of a daily practice to be resilient and be well and be strong, and you will have ups and downs. So any behavioral addiction needs to be looked at from a compassionate place and, really try to focus on the beginning of recovery. And that's why, like you said, Laura, it's a day-to-day reflection of how to be well for today or how to be well for this hour, especially during this week. For some reason, it was kind of a rough week for people who have mental illness and are thinking about tough things. So it's a life thing. It's not just a addiction thing. I believe this recovery thing.
Yeah, and I really think the addictive process is all around us. So certainly eating disorders follow such a very similar process. And then, Rebecca and I have both taught at the University of San Diego at the graduate level in a substance abuse class, and we have the students give something up for 28 days, something that they feel somewhat attached to, something that's kind of a regular part of their life. So some of them will give up caffeine or sugar, desserts, or many of them have been choosing things like social media or texting while driving, just things that are quite habitual for people. And there is an addictive process that underlies a lot of what we do in our lives right now, the smartphones and social media and all of this. So the students, it's absolutely fascinating to watch them go through the sense of loss, being mad at us as professors that we're making them do this, some of them relapsing, some of them wanting to lie about relapsing, which is obviously really common in recovery groups, and not being honest about that and kind of becoming sneaky about the behaviors and urges to use and all this. I mean, it's all the addictive process that we see with substance abusers and gambling addicts. It really plays out in this kind of microcosm of the classroom. And so does the recovery, where they find, I have them do like check-in groups in the class where they have like maybe 4 students that check in for the first few minutes. And they develop really strong bonds around recovering together, and they text each other outside of class, like, how are you doing without your caffeine? And they reflect in their papers on just how powerful it is to have that recovery group, how important it was to have that accountability. So really everything that we're seeing with our clients kind of plays out there. So I think, again, to agree with Rebecca, I feel like the book, just the coping skills and the hopefulness that we tried to put into both books, I think could be helpful for many people.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I did notice that there was some discussion of mindful eating and, your connection with your body and movement, yoga and recovery, self-compassion. All of those things really grabbed my attention. And I think that it seems very applicable to many experiences.
Yeah, and I would love to emphasize yoga and recovery and yoga in general. I mean, I've been a practitioner of yoga for 34 years. I'm a certified teacher as well as a student, and I believe that has helped me as a psychologist stay in the game for over 20 years. The ability to kind of keep coming back to the mat, especially for folks in recovery, to have a place to go back to with a teacher is awesome, to really reconnect with body, mind, and spirit. So everyone's going to do something that works for them. And this book has a ton of different ideas, even little small meditation techniques, as well as something like yoga, which is to me a lifelong wellness practice. So something for everybody, really, with each of these 52 idea chapters.
Yeah, I love it. Can you talk a little bit about your chapter on PTSD and recovery, and especially with you being at the VA, I sense that you probably see a lot of PTSD, as I do in my practice.
Yeah, Laura, thanks for what you do out there in the world of PTSD and trauma recovery. We appreciate it. Yes, I have seen a lot of PTSD over the last 20 years. What can I say? Self-compassion. That's my answer.
Yeah.
To PTSD in any form. Obviously, combat veterans versus rape survivors. The gamut in terms of military experiences. It's really just about an agreement with yourself that you will be on the road to be well and to hopefully connect with a provider, clinician, counselor, chaplain that is going to take you some of the way, and then you may have another one to take you a little further. In terms of PTSD, I believe folks need help with a professional, and our book is a nice little kind of extra little piece of the puzzle. But there is recovery from PTSD, and it's beautiful. I've seen it firsthand many, many, many times, and I have students that I work with that have seen it, and it's noticeable. So we can just offer that there's hope out there for both the counselor and the client on the journey, with a kind of a blanket of compassion around both.
Yeah, I think that piece is so important. So I don't practice EMDR myself, but I often refer clients for EMDR treatment. Eye movement and desensitization reprocessing, very heavily research-based trauma treatment, which is supposed to movement of the eyes back and forth, right? I gather is meant to help move memories that are kind of stuck in the short term, help it to move into long-term memory where it belongs, to prevent flashbacks, etc. So I always do refer clients, and they have really powerful response to the EMDR therapy. But it's a really vulnerable, raw time for them to be going through the EMDR therapy and really targeting the trauma. So I'm sure you see that, Laura, that as you are addressing the trauma, it's, so much is at the surface, so much is happening for that. And so just really needing there to be as much self-compassion and warmth and calm, and just that, you do want that secure sense around your client, and being able to kind of ground in this moment and find safety and security. I am here now, I am safe, and really be able to bring that mindful spirit to the whole process of recovering from PTSD.
Yeah, I think that any mindfulness practice that someone already has when they start therapy for trauma, to heal trauma, is going to help. It's just going to help make it easier. And, because you're less, mindfulness and a regular meditation practice makes you less reactive. And there's so much that comes up with trauma that your brain automatically reacts to. But if you're meditating regularly, your body is able to regulate itself better. So, I think that I'm glad you put in your book about PTSD, and also that you make it clear that these strategies are helpful for people who have PTSD, but having therapy is important too, because it's not something that people can just heal from on their own.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, and I want to convey that the therapist will need to heal too, and recover day to day, as you do, Laura, and other therapists that are listening to your podcast. What I've done on the way home from work, sometimes I don't work directly with PTSD the way you do, and some of your listeners, but I do have a lot of trainees that are in it all the time. And the work is difficult and challenging and awesome. And sometimes on the way home from work, I put my hand on my heart and I say, it's okay. You've chosen this profession. It's okay. You're okay. And just to kind of give myself a moment of compassion for the work I do and the work Julie and I do, to give that back to the therapist personally.
I couldn't agree with you more on that. I feel like it's, when you're working directly with people who've experienced trauma all day, it's valuable to try to have practices that you do throughout the day because, if I see 6 clients who all have complex PTSD, that's a lot of holding space for people's stories and witnessing what they've been through that was really horrifying for them and for anybody who went through that. So, you have to find ways to give yourself compassion and, mindfulness practice, like you said, for the therapist is very important. I 100% agree.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's everything really to stay well, especially over the long term, which of course we want great clinicians to be continuing to work in trauma and in substance abuse recovery over time. They have the most, without burnout, they have the most experience to give. And like you said, the containing, the holding is very important in substance abuse recovery and trauma recovery.
Yeah. So let's wrap up by if you guys could tell our audience where they can find your book and more of what you're doing.
Sure. Our books are both on Amazon. The Mindfulness Workbook for Addiction. If you click on, I think, my name, you can also get CEU credits through different organizations if you need them, which is cool. So you'd have to read the book, take a test. You know how that goes.
Cool.
Yeah. So it's nice if you already have the book or are going to get the Mindfulness Workbook for Addiction. It'd be great to get your little CEUs along the way. It's kind of a 2-for-1 thing. And then I think it's even going to be,
it should be in the actual Barnes & Noble bookstores now.
Yeah,
too. Amazon always gets it first, but I think at this point Barnes & Noble has it in the stores. And we also have a website for the books, mindfulnessworkbook.com. Should be able to get more information on both of the books.
Yeah. And the books are discounted at Target.com and Walmart.com. So everything's pushing out now. And so one way or another, your listeners will be able to find the book, hopefully very easily. But thanks for asking.
Yeah, thank you. And I will find that website and just put a link to it in the description of this episode so people can click right on it if they're listening on their phones.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rebecca and Julie. It was a pleasure having you on Therapy Chat today. Thank you for being here to tell us about your work, and thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you again for listening to my interview with Rebecca Williams and Julie Kraft. I hope you enjoyed it. I thought we had a really good discussion and very interesting. I am definitely a big fan of their work and their books. Hope you'll check them out too. And I want to specifically thank the following people who have made a pledge on Patreon: Lisa Wolfson, Mindy Bellata, Paula Scatoloni, a recent guest. Thank you, Paula. Noreen Vanderhoeven, Crystal Tejada, Elizabeth Rodriguez, and Francisca Michaela. Thank you all so much for contributing to keep Therapy Chat going. All it takes is $1 per month. If everybody who listens were to pledge $1 per month, there would be no problem keeping Therapy Chat going and getting better and better and creating more content for you. So thank you all for your support. And if you're interested in becoming a member through Patreon, go to patreon.com/therapychat. That's patreon.com/therapychat. Thank you, as always, for all of your support.
Thank you for listening to Therapy Chat with your host, Laura Reagan, LCSW-C. For more information, please visit therapychatpodcast.com.